You said, but Imam, you said that you were once part of his community. Why did you leave? I credit Imam Warithuddin Muhammad for turning my heart to the Quran. I remember one of the teachers that he brought to us was Sheikh Jafar Idris from Sudan. And one day we were in Harlem, and about 25 of his imams were there, and Sheikh Jafar recited some verses from the Quran, maybe 10 or 12 verses. And we taped it. And that was my first experience of hearing the Quran. You can hear my words on the tape saying that's the most beautiful thing that I've ever heard in my life. I have to learn that. And it was there that I began to learn to love the Quran. Imam Muhammad pointed my heart to the Quran.
Salaam Alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
We see that there were instances in which the Prophet openly, affirmed that reality. There's no way to deny that. I think people are not comfortable with the politics of common good. They're not comfortable with the idea of ta'awun al-birri wa-taqwa, right? And so here, the Quran is interesting in this regard, because the Quran is calling us to assist others, to assist each other in doing what is good and beneficial. And so the word ta'awun is support, is associated first with bir, ta'awun al-birri wa-taqwa.
And I love the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, so much that I had a nickname in the community of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad. They said Imam Siraj Wahaj, the Sunni Muslim Imam in the world community of Islam in the West. That was my nickname. And I learned and I love the Quran. And as I begin to read the Quran and to love the Quran and love Allah and love the Messenger, I begin to see what I thought was contradictions. So I would write Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, I wrote him letters, and I wrote him a 30-page letter, not in any mean-spirited way, asking my teacher, help me to understand this. 1978, some of the imams of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad was blessed to go to Naperville, Illinois for a 40-day imam training program. There were 100 imams there. I was blessed to be one of 5 to be chosen to continue my imam training in Mecca. And I went to my leader, Imam Warithuddin Muhammad. I said, Imam, I was chosen to go to Mecca to study. I was his imam over a masjid in Brooklyn, Masjid Muhammad, Masjid 7C. And I said, Imam, I would love to go. If you tell me that I can't go, I won't go. But I want to go. I really want to go. And Imam Muhammad said, go ahead.
And so taqwa in this regard is more specific to coming back to establishing specific mandates in Islamic legislation and uphold specific practices of worship. The idea of bir, we know that it is a concept which is much wider than taqwa. And so it consists of all kinds of good. But also, I'm not a person that believes in collapsing institutions within the black community that serve a particular function, especially if it's going to leave a vacuum in the community. And that has a lot to do with the principle of weighing harm and benefit. And some, unfortunately, in the Salafi da'wah, even from the Mashaykh, they don't like the concept of al-muwazana. But the concept of al-muwazana has nothing to do with Ikhwan al-Muslimin. It has everything to do with the principle that we find in Usul al-Fiqh of Maslahah. And Imam Izzuddin Abdul Salam and even Ibn Taymiyyah and a good many other scholars going back to Malik bin Anas rahmatullahi alayh looked at the reality of weighing harm and benefit. As a matter of fact, when we look at the reality of qiyas or analogy, and we look at the reality of the maqasid of the sharia, and we look at the reality of al-qawaid al-fiqhiyya, we find the issue of weighing harm and benefit. We find the hadith al-halal bayyin wal-haram bayyin wa baynahuma mushtabihat. The idea of mushtabihat is the idea of graded degrees of harm and benefit, because the halal and the haram come back to the issue of realizing harm and benefit. And so Islam is not just a mode of life, it's not just a methodology or a minhaj of dealing with black and white reality, but it is also a principle system of this decision making and value establishing and virtue realizing and recognition that we have situations in life which are gray, and we have to learn how to deal with those situations. And so when we look at those principles, our politics in engaging other groups, and we're not talking about the politics of political parties such as the Democratic Party and the Republican Party or whatever. We're not talking about that type of politics. We're talking about the idea of leadership and the idea of looking to the common good. How do we engage groups? How do we engage society? Islam doesn't mandate that every place that we live in is a society where it's transformed for Muslims to be the only ones in existence. There's no, we have four models, I like to say, of Islamic lifestyle. We have the model of Mecca in the time period of the early phase of the Dawah. We have the model of Al-Habasha, and we have the model of Medina, and I like to say that we have the fourth model, which is the model post Medina being established and Mecca being established, along with all of the examples of Islamic civilizations. And so we have all kinds of examples. If the Muslim did not know how to deal with other peoples, then you would find that there would have been bloodshed in Egypt, there would have been bloodshed in India. Iraq is not necessarily the greatest example because of what happened between the Muslims and the Persians. And you even find there's cases within the continent of Africa. Some are better than others, but you find that there's negotiation that takes place, and there is the reality that the believer, that the person of Iman, the person of following the example of prophets, are we looking for the long term in dealing with people and learning how to work with them? The Prophet Nuh ﷺ gives us the example of working with people in the long term. The example Yusuf ﷺ gives us the example of dealing with people that we may not necessarily, agree with on certain fronts, but being productive with them. Even the example of Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu gives us the example of going back to his people and learning that there is a system of priorities, how it is that we deal with people. Some people, I think that in the effort of establishing Tawheed, especially they forget that Iman is not just Tawheed. Iman has to do also with upholding certain values. So are we going to throw out the baby with the bathwater when we deal with any community, whether they be Christian or whether they be people from the nation of Islam, or whether they be the 5%ers or any group that exists on the face of the earth? Sure, there's always going to be a dialogue and a debate, and it has to be a scientific, methodological debate about engagement with people. We have to acknowledge the good that comes from dealing with that other people have contributed. In other words, going back to the point that if you're eliminating the goodness that is in people, so if someone is a person that is a person of sidq at the most fundamental levels, at the basic levels, we say, not the foundational level, but a person tells truth, a person keeps good character, and so on and so forth. Are we going to say that that we have to disengage that person because they necessarily don't have the beliefs that is that what we're saying? So a person is truthful, we're going to say that we're going to negate the truthfulness of that person, because they don't believe what we believe. So if a person is courageous, are we going to deny that they have courage? Bilal Mufti's position was very productive. You know what I'm saying? I think Mufti injected in recent times. It's not the first time that it's been done, but he has his own persona and own orientation. I think that he brought something to the table with engaging the Nation of Islam that's very productive. He talked about recognizing where there's goodness and there is experience in taking benefit. I personally, we have these debates on a regular basis, and with the Malcolm Shabazz Institute for Islamic Studies in Black Liberation, which is established in Cleveland. One of the reports that came out of there is that, sometimes what happens is geographically and historically, we take certain positions psychologically, and we take certain positions in the religion. And in this case, more specific, certain people take certain stances towards the Nation of Islam predicated upon the experiences that they may have had or what has taken place in a particular geographical zone. But it's not enough to be able to explain everything. When we look at cases like Philadelphia, like I mentioned that, I'm saying, like, we have many people that are solid Muslims, and the same thing, people that have come through war of Deen and others, that came out of the nation into war of the Deen, and they have, continued their growth cycle and growth process.
When I went to Mecca, Allah bless me, it was a life-altering experience. It changed my life. I learned so much. I grew so much. Loved the Quran. And as I was there in Mecca, I was thinking about going back, when I go back to America, how I was going to work harder for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then I noticed this. When I would prepare my khutbahs for Friday, I would write verses from the Quran and Hadith, and then I said, I have to say something about Imam Muhammad. I noticed that I was drifting away from the teachings of Imam Muhammad. I'm not saying anything bad about him, but where my heart was Quran and Sunnah. That's what I wanted. I didn't want nothing else.
Just like many of us, we continue growth cycle and growth process. And so that has been a means for people to become Muslims. And I say the same thing with the 5%ers. You understand what I'm saying? Because the 5%ers, which were spawned out of the Nation of Islam, they created certain cultural realities. And that's what I'm more concerned with, the conditions. I'm not concerned with exactitude and truth, because exactitude and truth, in our position as Muslims, comes from revelation. So the reality of the situation is that when we look, for instance, at the migration of the Muslims earlier on, in the time period of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to Africa, more specifically to Habasha, it had everything to do with the conditions. It didn't have to do that they were aligned with the beliefs of Najashi and the beliefs of the Ethiopian church, because that was not the case. It had to do with the fact that there were certain conditions that were established in that environment that allow for certain things to take place in the Muslim community. First of all, for the rights to be established, for there to be a sense of justice, for there to be a sense of being in an environment which was a less degree of the manifestation of kufr. And so we have to look at reality from that angle. You understand what I'm saying? That, we're at a point where we have to look at where are their degrees, of goodness. We cannot be in a situation where we're collapsing degrees of goodness because we want some sort of purity of belief in existence or practice to come about, because we're not even at that stage ourselves. That's the reality. We're not at the stage where we're exactly modeling community development, where we're modeling personal communal transformation. We're not at the stage where we're addressing the trauma that has come from out of oppression and certain things like that. That's just is not existing in the Sunni community at an effective level. That's not to say that individuals, because I always get this backlash from brothers. Well, so what about so-and-so? Last time, one of the brothers brought this up, came to my attention when I was bringing this up, and I brought it up specifically. This was some years back, about 5 years ago, because they were beefing online with brothers from the Nation of Islam. And I said, brother, why are our brothers beefing with these brothers? And I said, one of the things that we're not doing is we're not doing certain community work. We're not doing certain, we're not organizing ourselves in a disciplined manner. We're not, the leadership vacuum is very clear among us. And the anti-unity position that we have even amongst ourselves is very clear. We undermine each other, and we even dehumanize and degrade each other. So one of the things that was brought up is like, well, brother Jihad Safir in Cali, look at what he's doing, and you're saying nobody's doing nothing. I'm not saying individuals are not doing it. I never said that. And that comes from even our problem with each other, where we don't attempt to listen to each other. We are in the refutation modality and orientation, and we're not looking for beneficial information and knowledge to come from each other. We're not even looking to uphold. I can have 75% of something that's correct, or you can have 95%. We're willing to knock off the 95% because of 5% of being a problem. We're willing to knock off the 75% because of what's there that's problematic. And so when we look at these situations, you understand what I'm saying, the way that our logic is, a lot of times our logic is not a logic, and I mentioned this over and over again, which is really not in line with Islam. It's a logic which is actually problematic, because it's not looking towards community development, it's not looking towards acknowledging good, it's not looking, one of the brothers brought this up that's very solid. A lot of us, we want to start from zero. And as long as we have that mindset of starting from zero, we'll keep reinventing the wheel. We have to acknowledge that there's experience on the ground already. There's experience on the ground, there's mistakes that have been made. We need to revisit history. We need to revisit experiences. And we need to do so from a lens which will allow us to grow and move forward, not from a lens of revitalizing conflicts that were in existence in the past, or from a lens that is focusing just on the negative. Malcolm himself, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, who I consider to be a reviver of the deen, and that's a whole discussion in and of itself. And I've mentioned this before, and I've brought forward principles and reasons why I think that's the case. But Malcolm himself is chronicled, is recorded as having said that he will not talk negative about the nation, or will not be used as a means to go against the nation of Islam. Whatever theological differences we have with the nation of Islam can be discussed in an academic, scholarly setting. But whatever overlaps that we have, because some of us have cousins that are in the nation, we have neighbors that are in the nation, we have friends that are in the nation, we have experiences. You understand what I'm saying? And part of the dilemma that comes in when we start talking about history, and we start talking about these experiences, and we start talking about the realities specific of the black community, and if I may add the Latino community with that, is that it's like Imam Talib Abdur Rashid said from MIB. When it comes, for instance, to the Deen community,
and then I began to teach everything that I learned in Mecca, I taught there in the masjid. And then I noticed that there was beginning to be a division in the masjid. I noticed it. Therefore, I called Chicago and I said, I have to speak to Imam Muhammad. I have to come there to Chicago to speak to Imam Muhammad. And the secretary told me that the Imam can't see you this week. I called back and said that, please let the Imam know that I'm coming to Chicago and I will not leave until I see the Imam. He called me back and said the Imam said he will see you Friday. That Friday, I'll never forget, Imam Warathuddin Muhammad did the Jummah khutbah in Chicago. And after the khutbah, he saw me in his office and I said, Imam, I thank you for everything that you've done for me. You put me on the right path. But I have divided your community. I am responsible for have divided your community, for I'm not teaching your teachings. He said, well, what is it, Imam? And I began to tell the Imam the differences, how I understood the Quran and Sunnah. I won't go into details. But he told me, Imam, it's okay. You can have these differences and still be my Imam. And I said, Imam, I can't. I don't have the conviction to do it. So Imam Muhammad, I said, how should I do it? He said, well, you go to the community and you let them know. Do it in a good way. And then he came to New York. The day that I resigned, he was there and he spoke. I spoke and he spoke. And he said some of you thought that you would have a fight here. But I'm letting you know that Imam Siraj has done an honorable thing. What he has done is honorable.
Paper gold. You see, black folks are chumps. If America were to tell you to bring all the rocks in this country to her, and she'll give you $1 million for it, you'll do it. And the next day she'll tell you we're using rocks for currencies, chump.